We are joined by national champion, BYU alumnus, friend of the program, and ESPN college football insider Trevor Matich on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline. It's a Matich Friday for a change. Trevor, nice to have you back on the show.
It's great to be back with you guys.
Which schedule do you think will ultimately be more difficult for BYU? The 2016 slate, they finished 9-4, had a ton of big names, but a handful of underperforming teams on that rundown, or the approaching 2017 schedule with what we think are very high-level top-end teams?
I think the 2017 schedule will be a lot harder when we look at it from the end of the season. I mean, 2016 looked like an all-timer of a difficult schedule, but then you talked about some of the teams that sort of fell off the map. I mean, UCLA only won 4 games. Arizona and Michigan State only ended up beating 2 FBS schools. And the other school that they had, Mississippi State, well, they only beat 3 FBS schools in the regular season, ended up going 5-7 and made a bowl game because of their GPA average. So, those teams were expected to be, as we looked at them in last summer, to be a horrific run for BYU, and it turned out that those teams really couldn't beat very many folks. This year, the teams that they've got, including teams like Mississippi State, are going to be much improved, and I think that run early in the season we will look back on as being one of the most difficult runs BYU has ever had to face, and I think that it'll end up being that way when we look at it from the end of the season.
So FBS schedule says BYU's strength of schedule is dropping from 37th last year to 84th this year. We were trying to get a better understanding of the metrics. It looks like they are taking the preseason from last year and the preseason this year, and then comparing the two. But that just doesn't seem right, Trevor, at all. Especially we know as athletes that things happen during the season. Teams underperform, like you mentioned earlier. So how would you rate that metric that they're going off of?
I don't understand it because, 84th, for goodness sake, that means there's a bunch of teams that are not in the Power 5 that they have ranked ahead of BYU in terms of strength of schedule. I can't imagine that those teams have a run like LSU, Utah, Wisconsin, Boise State, Mississippi State on their schedule.
Right.
Forget about the rest of the conference in the group of 5. So I don't understand why it's that low. Now, I do get it that the last 6 games for BYU are against a bunch of teams that the schedule rankers would not respect. Not to say that they're not programs that could rise up and give BYU trouble, but I get that part. But those 4 games, LSU, Utah, Wisconsin, Boise State, and then add the 5th of Mississippi State, I think we'll see when we look back in December that those teams are really successful. And if BYU is able to get through them somehow, they will all be quality wins if BYU can do it.
And we're calling those 5 games the Furious 5, and that got us thinking, how does BYU remain at least somewhat relevant for the back half of the schedule? You got to perform well on the front half, but how well does BYU have to perform to be relevant so that people will be kind of keeping an eye on the Cougars when they take on teams that on paper they should beat?
Well, it would be phenomenal if they could win 2 of those games, 3 of those games, because Boise State at home is a game BYU has a very good chance to win. Utah, I think, is a toss-up. I think they have a chance to beat Utah. I mean, the Utes lost 8 players from last year's team to the NFL draft, and others were signed as undrafted free agents. So they're retooling, and they also have a brand-new offensive coordinator. So in some ways they're in the same boat as BYU with having to learn new systems. But I think the other 3, LSU, Mississippi State, and Wisconsin, if they can steal a win from one of those teams and end up 3-2 against that Furious 5, I think that'll be a terrific run.
Trevor, how would you rate or rank the Furious 5s from hardest to easiest?
I think LSU is the hardest. I mean, they are phenomenally talented. Now, they do have a new offensive coordinator in Matt Canada, and at quarterback they're just average with Purdue transfer Danny Etling. But the running game will be furious. The defense has all the LSU talent that you would expect, and I think this being the first game of the regular season under new head coach Ed Orgeron, it'll be a tough ask for BYU to beat those guys. Wisconsin also, in the running game. Their offensive line and running backs will be phenomenal. Their linebackers will be phenomenal again. They return all three starting defensive linemen, so it's a line of scrimmage on both sides. Wisconsin will be one of the best teams in the country at the combination O-line and D-line. Now, BYU's offensive line is very good as well, but Wisconsin, there's a lot of reasons why that'll be tough. Then I would say Mississippi State. Mississippi State, last year, they lost some games because they were young, but they've got a lot of players back, and their quarterback, Nick Fitzgerald, last year was one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the country. Well, this year they've been working on his passing in ways that they worked on with Dak Prescott a couple of years ago, teaching him how to maximize his talents to be able to complement that running with an effective passing game. And by all accounts, at Mississippi State, he's been improving in that category. And so Mississippi State will also be a tough out. Now, from there, I think Utah, and then finally Boise State, and that's how I'd rank the order of those teams.
ESPN college football insider Trevor Matich with us on BYU Sports Nation. He is on a tour of major college football towns getting ready for the approaching 2017 season in Austin, Texas right now. BYU does not stop in Austin, unfortunately, because the way things at BYU has gone for BYU against Texas, it'd be nice to see them back on the schedule,
They
Trevor.
don't want none.
Trevor Matich, again, with ESPN with us. BYU hasn't finished with 10 wins in a season since 2011. Vegas has set the over-under win total for BYU this season right at 10. The Cougars play 13 regular season games with the trip to Hawaii. Where would you set the over-under win total?
I think 10 is good. 10 is good because with 13 games, and you've got the hardest three with LSU, Mississippi State, and Wisconsin, and if you count those as losses just for the purposes of this discussion to set the over-under, then in order to get to 10 wins, they've got to beat Utah and Boise State. And if they can do that, then their over means they'd steal one of those games. And the most likely one for them to steal would probably be Mississippi State. But I think 10 is fair, and if BYU gets to 10 wins with this schedule, it'll be a pretty good run. Now, keep in mind that the schedule is really weird because the good teams are really good, some of the best teams in the country. The teams that aren't so good are really bad. And so which wins comprise 10 will matter in terms of how we evaluate a potential 10-win season. But I think 10 is an over and under really hinges on what they do against Utah and Utah and Boise State.
If BYU is 10-3 in the regular season, will they be ranked in the top 25 going to a bowl game?
I believe they'll be ranked in the top 25. And going to a bowl game, I think they would. I mean, a 10-win BYU on paper is very attractive, regardless of who those wins came from. This year, BYU doesn't have an automatic bowl tie-in like they've had in the past, so some bowl will have to move some things around probably in order to make room for BYU. But BYU is an attractive team for bowls because it's a true national program that'll put people in the seats. And so a 9 or 10 win season, I think BYU is definitely in a bowl, even 8 wins. Somebody will pick BYU because this is an attractive program for bowls. Keep this in mind, though, that most bowls already have contractually their opponents locked up from different conferences, so there aren't that many available slots at large.
Trevor, when I was looking at the schedule last year, and then understanding that this was a new coaching staff, so the players are going to have to, get acclimated to them and to the plays and the schemes, and then comparing that to this year and looking at the schedule, I think I'm a little bit more confident just because of how well they performed, and then having another year for this coaching staff. Does that give you any more confidence that this is year 2 under head coach Kalani?
Yeah, it really does. And part of it is because players understand what's expected of them in terms of preparation. And, Brian, you know how important it is to not wonder what you need to do. Yeah. But the other part is that it's year 2 of the offense. And Ty Detmer was known in the NFL as really a coach on the field. I mean, he actually was in meeting rooms and on practice fields and on the sideline during games, coaching up some big-name quarterbacks that he played with that he backed up, and that was part of his value in the league. He's known as a great teacher, not a good teacher, a great teacher. Well, now in the second year in this system, I think he'll throw an awful lot of stuff onto Tanner Mangum's shoulders and get deeper into that playbook. And because BYU is strong at tight end and strong on the offensive line especially, there'll be a lot of options for Ty Detmer to do in terms of play calling, in terms of scheming to create matchup advantages for the Cougars on offense. And if Tanner Mangum can handle the mental load, then I think you'll have a big leap in production, especially from the passing game from last year to this year. Now, Tanner didn't start last year, but he learned. He was in the meeting rooms. He got knowledge, and that's important because really when you look at the difference between a college quarterback and an NFL quarterback in terms of what they're being asked to do, a college quarterback is a running back with an arm most of the time. An NFL quarterback is a Rhodes Scholar with an arm. Well, it's that style of defeating the opponent mentally first that Ty Detmer brings to it, and Tanner Mangum, if he can handle the load, they'll have reason to be able to do a lot of things in year two, Brian.
Trevor Matich of ESPN with us on BYU Sports Nation, breaking down the BYU 2017 college football season. And right now, Trevor, you are on a tour of the United States to a lot of major college football towns. Let's go national. Who is your dark horse national championship contender this year?
Look at Oklahoma State. I think a lot of people are saying that they might win the Big 12, but I don't know how many folks are saying that they could get to the playoff and possibly win it all. But I think from a dark horse standpoint, they have a chance at that. They will have the best offense in the country. Mason Rudolph is one of the best pro-style quarterbacks out there. He's a great deep thrower. I mean, great. And he's got a wide receiving group that is the deepest and most talented in the country. James Washington is back from last year. We all know him. But they got a transfer from LSU in Tyron Johnson, who's even faster than Washington. And they go 5 or 6 deep at wide receiver with guys that would all start at many FBS schools. Now, they've got a 1,000-yard running back coming back and a pretty good offensive line. Their offense should be unstoppable by anybody, including Alabama. The question is the defense, and I think that's why people aren't looking at Oklahoma State as a potential national contender. But where they're strong on the defense complements their offense, and that's on the D-line. They have a lot of young, talented, disruptive pass rushers on that D-line that can get up the field and cause a lot of havoc. And when your offense is forcing the other team to go into comeback mode, then that kind of disruption among your defensive linemen creates turnovers. And I think that's the kind of defense that you need if you're not going to be a dominant defense, certainly one that's disruptive to cause trouble. And so I think Oklahoma State has a better shot at making national noise than some people give them credit for.
Wow, the Cowboys in Stillwater rejoicing at that projection from Trevor Matich. And I don't know how they feel about Mike Gundy's hairstyle, but probably in his opinion, he's got national championship hair going.
Well, you know, in the national championship of mullets, yeah. I've got to wonder about that, but then again, I'm nobody's fashion plate, so as soon as I get better looking, I'll give him grief for his mullet.
Trevor, I want to finish with this. Didn't get a chance to ask you on BYU Football Media Day about LaVell Edwards, honoring him, and BYU doing so by donning that iconic LaVell patch. What do you think about that?
I think it is wonderful. I think anything they can do to honor LaVell Edwards is well-deserved by LaVell Edwards. So often you'll see organizations honor somebody important that's passed on, in part because it brings attention to them. LaVell Edwards is one of those people that it doesn't matter what good it does for you. It doesn't matter, you know, what memorabilia might be, you know, sold. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is that the honor be paid to that person. LaVell is that guy. He transcends any other rationale for doing that kind of thing. And I like it that they're wearing the patch. I like it that they're focusing national attention on LaVell, because ultimately that's part of his legacy. The more that people look at how LaVell Edwards lived his life, not just as a football coach, but as a husband, a father, a church member, a friend, the more his legacy continues to grow, because he inspires for all the right reasons on so many different levels. And I love it that every time BYU is on TV, that will be talked about.
BYU national champion who played under LaVell Edwards, ESPN college football analyst and all-around good guy Trevor Matich with us on BYUSN. Trevor, we appreciate the time, man. Have a great rest of your college football city tour.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Spencer. Thanks, Brian.